most folks you worried about just grasshoppers. And let me tell you what I do with grasshoppers. Let me show you. He says in verse 23, that bringeth the princes to nothing. He says, do you not know that even in your worrying and your prayers, he says, I have allotted time for these men to be in power. He says, watch this. He says, I have allotted them to be in power. I'm going to show that to you. Watch this. And in verse 23, he says, that bringeth princes to nothing, and he maketh the judges of the earth as vanity. Yea, they shall not be planted. Yea, they shall not be sown. Yea, their stock shall not take root in the earth. And he shall also blow upon them, and they shall wither. And the whirlwind shall take them away as stubble. In the ancient Near East, it was widely known that there was a wind called the eastern wind that would blow. And it would be so powerful and so hot that it would turn the grass and kill it. It would turn flowers and cause them to wilt. The Lord uses this metaphor to show himself in the power of the wind. He's saying, I am the spirit that controls the affairs of this world. And when I want to, I can just come in and remove any king. I can come in and remove any prince. And then in verse 25, I want you to see this because the lesson turns on its head in verse 25. This is what we call a movement in theology. He says in verse 25, to whom then will you liken me, or shall I be equal, saith the Holy One? And then he says, now I want you to understand, because I've told you all this about me, and because I've given you comfort in my character, and because you realize there's nothing I can't do and there's nothing beyond my power, he says, now I want you to understand the comfort of my grace. Look at verse 26. He says, lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who have created these things, that bringeth out of their host by number. He calleth them by names, by the greatness of his might, for that he is strong in power, and not one faileth. Brothers and sisters, the story is told of a famous preacher in England. He was going to take a vacation, and he received tickets to a maiden voyage on this particular ship. And, the day before he was supposed to leave, he and his family, there was business that had to be taken care of back home. What happened was the ship called the Titanic went out on this maiden voyage, and it was defeated. It was failed by an iceberg. Some years later, this preacher took the ticket that he had. He had it framed, and under the frame he put what do you call it? A statement that said, "God showed His grace to me, Amen, and His love." And he put that proudly in his office. And one day a fellow preacher came by, and they sat and had lunch and talked for a little while, and all of a sudden he saw the framed ticket that gave him entrance onto the Titanic, which he did not use. And the preacher looked at it and read the saying underneath, "God has shown me mercy and grace and love." And the preacher looked at him and said, "You know, I had a friend who was a preacher that was on that ship. And my preaching friend died. But while he died, the people who he was with in the water, he tried to bring them to Christ. So even in his death, he tried to do what God assigned him to do." He says, now let me ask you this question. Did God love you more than he loved him? You see, for some, we will have pain in our bodies. We will have to go to the hospital to have surgery. Perhaps amputations in our future. For others, you may not ever see a doctor in your life. You might live to be a ripe old age and die peacefully in your sleep. But you cannot judge God based on the problems in your life. You cannot judge God on the things that you go through. and say, well, God must love him more than he loves me. God is in control of all. God is the same God who was with Hezekiah when they were ruling as he is when they're in Babylonian captivity. It's the same God. Don't let the devil tell you there's a different kind of God because you're going through problems. God knew you were going to have problems. God says, I'm in the midst of it. I'm trying to teach you something while you're in the problem.
Yeah.
Stop always looking around and crying, woe is me. I have a purpose for your problem. Brothers and sisters, the Bible goes on to say, lift your eyes on high. Behold, who have created these things, that bringeth out their hosts by number. He calleth them all by names by the greatness of his might. For that he is strong in power, not one falleth or faileth. Verse 27, why sayest thou, O Jacob, and speakest, O Israel, my way is hid from the Lord, and my judgment is passed over from my God. They said, God, you don't see our problem. You don't care about our circumstance. He says in verse 28, hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, he doesn't faint, neither is he weary. There is no searching of his understanding. He says, I don't grow weary of you calling on me. Pray to me all the time if you want to. I never get tired of hearing you. When you're going through battles, let me know because I'm going to be there. I'm not absent because I'm silent. Verse 29 says, he giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might, he increases their strength. See, brothers and sisters, you have to understand, man has a certain amount of strength, but it's not going to be enough. See, the problem with some Christians is that we never tap into the source.
Amen.
If you have a lamp, and you have a light bulb, and that lamp and that light bulb has connected to it a plug, you can put that lamp, that light bulb, and that plug on a table and never see the light. You got to have them to sit like, you got to have them, right? Praise the Lord. But you can have all those things, all those elements can be in play and still not have light. The only way you get the power for that light bulb to come on is to take that plug and plug it into an outlet. See, that's why they call it, in electronics, they call it power. You got to have power to see the light. Praise the Lord. Some of us got light bulbs and lamps and cords and we ain't got no power. Because we refuse to plug it into the source. The moment you realize God is your source, and the moment you say to yourself, I can't do anything until God gives it power, that's when you will be okay. That's when you know my faith is strong. Brothers and sisters, I want to go on. I'm almost finished. I know you're all ready to go. I want you to see this in verse 30. He says, even the youth shall faint. Now, I was just teasing Brother Jimmy. I heard him when I was preparing back in the back, and I heard him playing with the grandkids. And, hey, come in, come in. See, young folk got energy. Praise the Lord. If we could find scientifically how to bottle that energy and take it for ourselves. Amen. Be a millionaire. They got energy. But you know, you ever notice when you want to make them tired, you take them to the park, amen? Amen. You let them run all day and run. Go ahead, Jimmy. No, don't sit. Keep going. Then you get them in the car before you say, put your seatbelt on. They get tired. They got energy, but it runs out. He said, even your youth shall faint and be weary. And he says, and your young men shall utterly fall. Interesting phrase there, because that word, if you do the etymological study on that word, it says young men, but it could connote another thing. In the etymological root of that word, it pictures what they call a special young man, or special young men, or specific men. And perhaps it is alluding to the fact that when they had games in the ancient world, like the Olympic Games and games of that sort, they would have men who would train. And so their bodies would be like fine instruments, and they could run the mile, the 200, and the 4x4. They wouldn't get tired because their bodies were like machines, and they were strong. He says, but even them, they're going to get weary. But watch this. I'm so glad that my God put a but in my situation.
Amen.
Woo. Some of y'all, thank God. God always says but. See, I learned in my 10th grade English class, the word but is what's called a contrastive conjunction. See, that means whatever was said previously is not going to change. Hello, somebody.
Amen.
He says, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. Hallelujah. See, the difference is the word wait here, the wait is a verb, but it literally does not mean a passive. It's not a passive verb. In other words, it doesn't mean wait and nothing. Oh, you're catching on the way home. When you wait on the Lord, it doesn't mean that you just sit here and do nothing and then Jesus here yet. No, he's not here. I ain't gonna do nothing. I ain't gonna work in the church. Bob said, wait. Let's see what the Lord gonna do. No. The word wait there is an active. It's an active verb. It means as you're going through your life. He said, just know that the Lord is going to be okay. He's going to take his time, but you just keep on doing what you're supposed to do. People get on your nerves, keep on saying, God bless you. Amen. Somebody cuss you out, say you have a great day too. Amen. Folks jump in front of you in line and lie and steal and cheat, and even if they kill, you keep on doing. You know why? Because you're waiting on the Lord. Wow. And when you wait on the Lord gives you supernatural strength. I said last week, it can't be Brian, because if you do that to Brian got something to say to you. And Brian does say some things from time to time. Hello, somebody. But if you wait and learn how to be a waiter, he says, guess what I'll do? I'll give you some more minutes on your cell phone. Praise the Lord. I'll renew your plan. And watch this. He says, and I will renew your strength. He says, they shall mount up. That means they shall ascend. They shall go higher than their problems. He says, with the wings, the pinions, if you will, the bird's wings, the carpus, the metacarpus, the phalanges. He says, I'll give you all you need. Some commentators believe that that word there, mount up with wings, it really alludes to the fact that eagles, when they shed their wings, they get new wings. So it's a text of renewal. He's saying you don't have the strength now, but guess what? I'm going to renew it. Hallelujah. Amen. I want to give you something new. I'm going to give you something you never had before. He says, I'm going to renew your strength. And watch this. He says, so that you can mount up as an eagle. Then he says, and they shall run and not be weary. Now, as a former athlete, I can tell you, I hated running. I hated running. That's one of the reasons why I didn't play basketball in high school. I tell with the bar all the time, I say, y'all ran too much. But they say, but you played football. I say, yeah, but we had plays. The whistle would blow. Amen. You ain't just getting up and down. Then I tried soccer, and I thought I was going to die. Amen. Got the ball all the way down to the goal, and then somebody stole it. Coach said, go get him. Bigger than the football field. So you'll get tired of running, amen? Amen. He says, but if you're in the Lord, you'll run and not be weary. And then he says, and watch this, and you'll walk and you won't faint. Oh, this is a beautiful passage, brothers and sisters. He's saying, listen, you think you're tired, but you just keep walking. Right. Sometimes you got to run through stuff, but every now and then you got to walk through some problems too. He says, but when you walk in the Lord, today might look like a bad day, but tomorrow's coming. As I said before, I love the phrase, this too shall pass. I don't know who's going through problems this morning. Perhaps it's you. Perhaps you're going through some situations and you're wondering if God is there. Brother, friend, visitor, I want to tell you God is there. But he's saying this to his children. You have to be in his body to get his blessing. You can't be outside the family of God and expect to have the blessings of God. I know, Brother Lewis is a loving person. But if a random child ran up to him at Kroger's and said, Daddy, buy me this. I wonder what Bashar would say at first, but then I would also wonder, what would Lewis's reaction be? Perhaps it would be, I'm not your daddy. You better get your daddy to pay for that. Praise the Lord. But understand, when we run to daddy and say, Daddy, and he's not our father, what do we do then? You got to be in the family of God to get the blessings of God. I'll end with this story. A gentleman by the name of Horatio Gates Shepard, or Stapler, rather. He was a prominent American lawyer. He was a Presbyterian church leader. He was married to a beautiful woman by the name of Ann Larson. She was from a place called Stenbergar, Norway. They got married in Chicago. And he had 4 daughters at the time and 1 son. Mr. Spafford was a prominent lawyer, and he was a senior partner in a law firm. And, the Spaffords were doing very well. They were very financially secure. And one of his friends was the great evangelist D.L. Moody, Dwight L. Moody. In 1871, during the Great Fire, Mr. Spafford had invested in large properties in Chicago, and all his properties burned to the ground. That was a sizable real estate venture. And then later on in 1871, one of his 4 daughters died of scarlet fever at the age of 4. 2 years later, in 1873, Mr. Spafford decided his family should take a holiday vacation in Europe, and they chose England. And knowing that his friend D.L. Moody was preaching there in the fall. But before he could leave with his family on the boat, he had been called by a business situation. So he said, you all go on and I'll be with you in a couple of days. I have to take care of business at home. And so he delayed his going. The ship that took his wife and his 4 beautiful daughters was hit by another vessel, an iron vessel. 266 people died, including his 4 daughters. His 9-year-old by the name of Margaret Lee, his 11-year-old by the name of Anna, his 5-year-old by the name of Elizabeth, and his 2-year-old by the name of Tanetta. On November 22nd, 1973, brothers and sisters, this man not only lost his daughters, he lost his livelihood. And his wife was the only survivor from that particular tragedy. Later on, he had another daughter. His daughter's name was Bertha Spafford. And she said, my father took that tragedy and he wrote a song that many of us still sing today. The name of that particular song that Mr. Spafford, Horatio Spafford wrote was called It Is Well With My Soul.
Amen. And
so Mr. Spafford, through his tragic situation, understood that even though he is going through the chaos and the problematic in his life, he still knows it is well with my soul. Perhaps somebody here this morning saying in their heart of hearts, they want to get it right with God, because you can have trouble with God and you can have trouble without God. But if you have trouble with God, God will bless you. And trouble without him Means you're just out there by yourself. And sooner or later, you're going to lose hope. Sooner or later, you're going to lose faith. Sooner or later, suicide may look like a better answer. But if you're in Christ, if you're in the Lord says, I'll never leave you, nor forsake you. How do you get into the Lord? The Lord says there are prerequisites that I must have. I sent my son to die for you. That's part of the equation. That's the most important part. But here's the problem. I died not just for those in the church. I died for the world. But the only difference between the world and the church is that they obeyed me and you didn't. How do you respond to a loving God? He says, first, you got to hear what I say. Then you have to believe what I say. That means believe with all your heart. If you believe what I tell you, he says this is what you'll do. You have a change of mind. You'll change your mind about what you're doing. That's repentance. And then he says once you change your mind, then you confess or say the same thing that I say. My son is your Lord and your Savior. Once you confess that great confession, the Lord says then we can baptize you. Baptism means that you go down a sinner and you come up a saint. Preacher, I don't see anything magical in the water. God never asked you to see. He just asked you to do. And once you're baptized into Jesus Christ, the Bible says that we put on Christ. We put on Christ, meaning that whatever we are baptized into Christ, God now sees Christ in us.
Amen.
Amen. Can you imagine if I came to church with no clothes on? Everybody would be looking at me like I was crazy. You know why? Because they want to see somebody clothed. Amen. Amen. And the Lord wants to see you clothed too. You're naked in sin until you're clothed in Christ. Amen. Hear the word of God. Believe it with all your heart. Repent of your sin, confess Jesus Christ, and be baptized. And you become a member of this family. And when you leave this earth, you will know that you're going to be saved. And you'll be with the Lord forever. I've said enough. If you need prayer, stand where you are. If you're a child of God already, stand where you are. Let's sing the song of invitation. When